This video is going to demonstrate and go over how to create a slot together stool in VCarve Pro. I am using version 11. This video is going to lay out this stool as we see. A few things that we need to understand and what we're going to do is understanding how it is that we are making this slot fit into this slot over here, and also getting the spacing of this dados set correctly. So what we are going to essentially be doing is creating something like we have here. This slot is sliding into this, and then we have some dados in notches on the top side to fit into the top base of the stool table or whatever it is that you are going to make use of this for. So to create, I'm going to start in with VCarve Pro, starting up a new job. I'm going to go ahead and create a new file, entering in the X, the Y, and the material thickness. For slot together parts to fit correctly, we do need to know exactly what the thickness of that material is. So 3/4 inch plywood may not actually be 3/4, it may be 0.74. So in that case, we are going to change the material thickness down to 0.74 or whatever your material thickness actually measures. The Z0 position, you have the option for material surface or machine bed. Depending on what type of operations you do will depend on what type of zeroing you do. Typically, I zero to the machine bed. Most of my cutting is not depth critical, meaning that a dado depth or a slot and how deep I'm going into the material is not as important as how deep through the material that I am going to be cutting. So I don't like to cut too deep into my material bed or my table surface. So by setting Z0 to the machine bed, I'm able to more easily control how deep into the table surface I'm going to go. That allows for a little bit of fluctuation in the material thickness itself. So once this job setup is completed, I'm going to select OK. To create the stool, or one leg or side of the stool, I'm going to simply start with a rectangle. Sketching out a rectangle, clicking and dragging, then coming over to the width, and I'm going to specify the width to be 12 inches and the height in the Y direction of 24 inches. So this is the overall width and height that the stool is going to be. Closing the rectangle tool, I'm now going to sketch out a line. You could also use guidelines for this. I like to use sketch lines for helping with layout. So I'm going to snap to the midpoint on the top, drag down, and snap to the midpoint on the bottom. Right-clicking will end the line segment tool. I will now create an ellipse or a circle or something that is going to create the little design aspect of it. Again, just jumping back over to the completed design. I'm going to sketch out an ellipse or a circle or whatever shape that you would like to have this shape be. And to do that, I'm going to use the Draw Ellipse tool, snapping again to the middle point or the intersection of that, dragging out an ellipse to the size that I think is going to fit the design that I'm looking for. I'm going to do the same thing across the bottom. We'll now close the ellipse tool, and I want to add a little bit of shape to the outside of this. And to do so, we're going to use node editing, selecting that rectangle, typing the letter N for node editing, shortcut keyboard, or coming over to edit objects and selecting the node editing mode. Once we select node editing mode, we're able to see the individual nodes, and we also get a clear node in the center. I want to create or transform this line segment into a Bezier curve. So when I hover over top of that line, I get a little symbol down there, the tilde symbol that says if I right click, I'm going to get some options. And anytime you right click, start paying attention and understanding that these are shortcuts. So if I was just to hover over top of that line span, rather than right clicking and just typing the letter B, that would create the transform to a Bezier curve. Now what this has done is given me two control points here to allow us to stretch and move this shape around. We could kind of shape it however we like or see that the profile of this stool would likely be. And once you have that completed, that is the side profile. We will now use the scissors or the trim tool to remove half of our stool away, which we will then use the mirror tool to create the identical mirror of the right side to the left side. So coming over to Edit Objects, using the interactive trim, now gives us scissors. When you bring those scissors over top of that line segment, you see the scissors open, and then you click, it trims that away. You could also click and hold the left mouse button down, and as you drag over top of the parts, it just automatically trims those parts away. Now we have half of the side of the stool. I do want to mirror this, but before I mirror it, I don't want to have a duplicate vector, and I still need to have the midpoint line here that we will later offset. So I'm first going to, before mirroring, going to break this apart, again using node editing. This time I am just typing the letter N on the keyboard rather than coming over to the Edit Objects and selecting the node editing tool. Going to right click over the node editing and select Cut Vector. While I'm here, I'm going to make note of that letter C. That is a shortcut. That shortcut now allows me, rather than when I hover over top of this node, rather than right clicking, I'm just going to type the letter C. And what that does is it now separated and cut that vector off of and separated it from the rest of the shape. We'll now select half of this, use the Transform Objects Mirror, and going to mirror it to the left. Holding the Shift key down, selecting the other half, we can now join this together. Again, shortcut command is J for join, or coming over and clicking the Object button for join vectors. It tells us that there are two open vectors, and we will join that and create one closed shape. We see that that is now a closed shape. Now to create the slot that we want to have on this, so we want to offset this line a total of 3/4 of an inch. So coming over to Offset Layout, the bottom left icon is for offset. With that vector selected, we're going to set the option to offset in both directions. Now our material thickness is 0.74 inches, and offsetting a distance of half of that plus a little bit more to allow for a easier slide together fit. I'm going to offset both directions by 0.375 or 3/8 of an inch. Going ahead and clicking offset now gives us two offsetted lines. Closing the offset tool. With that being offset, we're later going to trim these little bits away, but with this being a radius here, those offset lines are offset directly to the right, so we need to extend those lines out. Selecting, holding the Shift key down, selecting both of those lines, selecting once more gives us our control points. Holding the Shift key down allows it to stretch and grow in both directions. You see the bottom section of parallel lines are also extending out past the same that I am extending it up from the top. With those extended, I'm now going to draw another polyline from the midpoint of this line, center point right here. This is going to be the split of our slots. Once that is drawn, I right click to end that line tool, and just using the the left arrow key to shift that line segment over that intersects all of that. Now it is time to make a duplicate copy of this so we could trim the objects away to make a top side and a left side so both slots mesh up with one another. It's going to do a sweep select, and there is a difference for sweep selecting from left to right or from right to left. If going from right to left, everything that is intersecting the window that is being drug out is going to be selected. Going from left to right, only what is entirely inside of that window will be selected. So with all those selected, I'm going to select it one more time to get us our control points to be able to move this around. As I am moving this around, I'm going to hold the control key down and just move it over to the right. By holding the control key down, that is going to make a duplicate copy of what we were just dragging around. With our duplicate copy set here, we no longer need this midpoint. I suppose I could have removed that prior to making a copy of it, and we are now ready to use the scissors to trim these objects away. So on the left object, I'm going to trim all of the sections from the top side. Then the object on the right, I'm going to remove everything on the bottom side. Again, holding the scissors down and just dragging over. We have now created a slot on the top and a slot on the bottom that they will slide together after being cut. We do have to make a modification to allow for the radius of the cutter. But before I do that, there are some bits that are not needed. It is always good habit to remove those bits as you progress on. Later, they'll, if not removed now, you'll forget about them, and they may end up causing you some hassle when you go to toolpath or cut. So right now we have, in a perfect world, if we were able to cut sharp inside corners with a round radius bit, this would work. But we do need to allow for the radius of the cutter to come in these turns. We could use the dog bone or T-bone option, but for this case, I'm just going to use node editing again, typing the letter N, and then remember we talked about right-clicking and converting and knowing what those shortcuts are. So I'm going to right-click and know that the shortcut is the letter A. I'm going to drag that arc down. That now allows the cutter to more smoothly transition around that slot. And remembering that shortcut letter A, just going to hover over top of that line span and type the letter A. So that converts that to a line span to an arc. We now have two pieces that will slide and slot together. The next object that we need to draw is the object for the top, and add a couple dados for these bits here to slide into. To create that top, I'm going to use a draw circle, and I want to have this circle drawn at the midpoint of this opening. So if we snap over to the left side, with that snap still being there, snapping to the right side of that, we get this line here that we will then get a snap to midpoint. So we're going to drag that circle out bigger than what the two legs are there, or wings of our sides, closing the draw circle, coming in to create a rectangle. But before I do that, I am going to clear all selections by just clicking out in white space. That removes that circle from its selection. Coming over to draw rectangle, going to use the snap to snap this rectangle from the left side of the leg off to the right side, which is giving us an infinitely small rectangle in the Y direction. We need to make this a little bit bigger than our 0.74 material, so let's just call that 0.75, then apply. That is going to represent a dado or a pocketing out cut that we will do that will allow these to fit inside. I need to have this same rectangle copied off to the right side. So holding the control key down as I drag makes a copy of that, then selecting and clicking the endpoint from the lower left of that rectangle and snapping to the point of the opposite side. We now have the dados that can be cut for the slots. I'm going to now move our circle up out of the way and off of our material. We do want to ensure that these two rectangles are centered vertically on our circle. So to do so, I'm going to select the two rectangles, holding the Shift key down and selecting the circle. Remember, when using the Transform Object Centering tool, it centers all selected objects to the last selected objects. So with that being done in that order, I'm going to use the center horizontal or vertical, and you see that they got shifted down just a little bit. We made the compensation on our slots with a radius. We do need to have the same compensation or compensation for the radius internal cuts for the square outside cuts to fit inside. This time we will use the dog bone feature found under the fillet tool. I'm going to be cutting this out with a 1/4 inch cutter, so the radius is going to be 0.125 or 1/8 of an inch. And if we were unsure of what the decimal equivalent of 1/8 inches, text boxes within VCarve Pro could have math be done in them. So I could type in 1/8, and when I hit the equals symbol, it will equate that equation for us. Going to set the option for dog bone, come over and click on each of the corner. We could see that we are getting a dog bone looking type effect that is allowing that cutter to cut onto the outside and allowing us to be able to fit a square corner or a square peg into a round hole. With that done, we need to now rotate these two rectangles 90 degrees to allow the opposite leg to fit in. So before we just rotate, I'm going to select both of those rectangles with the sweep selection, doing a Control-C to copy those objects to the clipboard, then typing the letter R or coming over to the Transform Objects and selecting Rotate. Going to rotate a 90 degrees, selecting Apply, then closing, and we'll then do a Control-V to paste back in those original rectangles after rotating. We now have the objects all set and ready to create your toolpaths. I would profile the outside of these objects here, profile cut to the outside, then depending on what diameter cutter you're doing, in the case that I have set this up, I am using a 1/4 inch cutter, and we would need to pocket these out. So I'd pocket these out to maybe a depth of 3/8 of an inch, half the thickness of the material. That will allow, after these two are slotted together, to fit right into those slots. So that is a quick and easy way to get a slot together stool. These same methods could be used to create slot together tables or slot together any type of shapes. Hopefully this was some use for you. Have a good day.